Welcome to the Cannabis Review, another episode we've got today. I hope everybody's keeping well out there. I've got a great guest for everybody today. Now, we've had a couple of great lawyers on the show so far, and this is another one to add to our list. It's Darren Kaplan of Hoban Law Group. Darren is the chair of the Cannabis Law section in the Colorado Bar Association, and he's written and contributed to numerous articles and spoken at conferences and webinars regarding cannabis law and regulation. How are you keeping today, Darren?
Oh, I'm doing just fine, especially given the circumstances. I do want to wish your audience a very happy new year. I know that it's been just the most interesting 2020 ever, and 2021 is kicking off in much the same fashion. So I send a big hug to everybody at home and just waving hello and sending my greetings and warm wishes to get things started.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for taking your time to join us. We're hoping we're going to be able to educate the viewers on a couple of different topics. For those who don't know about Hoban Law Group, like most of the people in the industry know, it's a globally renowned firm. Do you want to explain to the viewers exactly in a little brief segment what Hoban Law Group is, what you specialize in?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I mean, not to get too into the history of sort of regulated marijuana and regulated cannabis in the United States, but Bob Hoban, our name sake and our face partner of the firm here. He was instrumental at the very beginning of medical cannabis here in Colorado. That started, of course, the conversations for state-regulated programs like the one we see today in Colorado and roughly 15 other states, where you have both medical and adult use programs. We've been instrumental as well in the conversations toward sort of hemp regulation and legalization here in the United States and increasingly around the world. To sort of generally explain our practice, we like to fashion ourselves as a traditional business law firm in the sense that we offer sophisticated legal services to any commercial aspirant. And in that sense, we focus specifically on the regulated widget of cannabis, both sides of the plant, hemp and marijuana. Our goal really is to be the most educated and most knowledgeable voices in the room on any topic to do with that plant, and particularly where it comes to our clients, we want to be able to help from A to Z in terms of everything that you would need to know to operate as a legitimate and sophisticated business.
Yeah, no, it's one of the reasons I like having legal experts on the show so much, is that when you get through to everything, the laws and everything, like the lawyers are the people at the center of pretty much every major industry, and cannabis is going to be no different from that. So having your perspective is always enlightening for the viewers. I'm going to kick off with the first topic, and it's the MORE Act. Can you give a brief overview to the viewer what the MORE Act is for the US, how important it is, and how the last couple of days might have changed the functions of that for this year?
Sure, yeah, and it's a quite popular conversation at the moment. I can tell you, I'm getting a lot of emails and a lot of calls, especially in the last days since the Georgia elections, as to what the future of cannabis policy at a federal level looks like here in the United States. Just to sort of take a step back and explain where we are ahead of the MORE Act, as everybody likely knows, federal prohibition is still very much a reality here in the United States. Marijuana is not lawful under federal law, and it remains a controlled substance. What we have seen happen over the last several years is states have taken it into their own hands to regulate certain aspects of the cannabis plant. So some states will have medical only programs or low THC cannabis programs. Other states will have, like Colorado, full-fledged adult use or recreational, as well as medical, as well as hemp, and other states have nothing. So there is a patchwork of different legalities and different regulations at the moment that really only federal legalization can help to solve. The other aspect of that is if I'm in Colorado as a cannabis cultivator, there's no way for me to get my state lawfully grown marijuana to California, let's say, to sell there. It creates impossibilities for cross-state business and really hampers the economic potential for the cannabis industry here in the U.S. So that's the background. Obviously, politically, there's cannabis is a quite popular bipartisan issue. We like to joke that in the 2016 election, it was, not a particular candidate that won, but cannabis. If you look at all of the different states that Hillary Clinton won, states that Donald Trump won, the prevailing theme there is that cannabis was popular across the board. And so we anticipate and we understand that there is broad support for legalization of cannabis. The states that have already gone there have seen success, of course, and there's growing interest on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. to do something about this at a federal level. Of course, politically, it's not always convenient, and there are still differences between the two parties. Of course, on hemp, we saw the 2018 Farm Bill come through Mitch McConnell, signed by Donald Trump, and certainly worked on by Chuck Schumer. So you had a very bipartisan consensus. When we turn to the MORE Act, it's really the biggest so far shot across the bow to try and start a broad conversation around what descheduling marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act would look like. That is the biggest effect of the MORE Act, theoretically. A lot of people think that the MORE Act does substantially more than it would do. And perhaps that is an overstatement of mine, in the sense that, if there were a successful descheduling of marijuana, of course, that would be huge. But people still do need to understand, I guess, two realities about it. The first is there are still political difficulties for the MORE Act to actually pass the Senate, even in a 50-50 / Democrat controlled Senate in the next term. We can discuss that a little more if you'd like. But B, the MORE Act doesn't actually establish some kind of uniform regulatory system that all states are going to, tap into, and suddenly we'll have a harmonized marijuana regulatory system around the United States. States will still be able to opt out, and the legislation itself will not provide many guidelines for how those states that do opt in will operate. So you're still going to see this state-to-state patchwork of things, and people should more look at the MORE Act as a starting point to a conversation for comprehensive federal legalization and regulation. So it is a good start. I think people are very excited about it, especially because last week we would have thought you had a Mitch McConnell-controlled Senate next term. Now it's looking more like a Chuck Schumer-controlled Senate next term. But that's still a very thin majority. There are still moderate Democrats who may not support that. There is still a filibuster in the Senate. And again, people need to recognize that even in the Democratic Party, there are going to be different priorities that people place in this legislation. And there's going to be significant debates over what that looks like.
Yeah, I think everybody's looking for that magic pill that basically allows for the consolidation of the US market by 2 to 3 major corporations, and then their global expansion is going to be the domino effect for a global recreational market, which I think is the main objective for a lot of brands who are getting into this industry.
And what we've seen, I mean, even just distinguishing between the medical and adult use world is going to become really a thing of the past. I mean, people will, if I were to pull out my crystal ball, given what you've just said, even, what we see in Colorado is a consolidation of those worlds. We initially, when we had regulations in the state, there was a medical set of regulations, a recreational set of regulations, and those deviated some. Over the years, as experience has rendered, those in reality have become more and more the same thing. And realistically, patients are going into one corner of the dispensary where they have the higher potency or medical sort of grade product, but everyday folks are otherwise going into that same dispensary and buying the same products at a lower potency. And so it begs the question whether these distinctions we created from the beginning, what caused those. I would suspect, a lot of stigma in our society and in our government and in our community around cannabis, and I think it's been traditionally much more palatable for medical to start things, and then it evolved, as you say, into this recreational. And when people see that the water is not getting poisoned once cannabis is sold in your city, suddenly the polls change and people become more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's one of the big misconceptions, and one of the things that needs to change is that differentiation between medical and recreational. It needs to go for, I think, a brand new market that's faced for Ireland setting up. We've talked to Josh Hangfling, a number of experts from Colorado already, and again, everybody across the board has kind of said that there should be no distinction between medical and recreational. Right laws for a cannabis industry, as opposed to trying to separate them now and then amalgamate them, which is going to be a bit of a shit show in the future.
Absolutely. And, you know, when I think of the initiation of Colorado's program here, I mean, you have to remember we were one of the first states to ever do this, right? And we had a governor at the time who's now a senator, a newly elected senator, then Governor Hickenlooper, who was really not for cannabis legalization, even when it happened, even when the state passed it. And it was a very controversial thing here in Colorado as well. We had to get we're very proud of this. They had to create essentially rulemaking work groups that brought together, you know, the parents that were concerned about their kids' access, the teachers who were concerned about school, the police who were concerned about enforcing, the businesses who were concerned about incentivization, right? These are all the different stakeholders that any given state or country has to bring together under one roof and around one table and make comfortable and make happy about this program. Like any other, I guess, new industry, we sometimes forget how far we've come since then, you know, that we don't have to have those meetings every week here in Colorado and assuage one another that things are okay. But it's also understandable that in places that have not had that experiment yet, that there are those fears and those stigmas, and we have to be responsible stewards of our industry where it is established to continue to demonstrate that this can become a sophisticated and global industry rather than a niche or taboo industry.
Yeah, and that leads me perfectly on to the second segment that I wanted to talk to you about is packaging and labeling. I know this is something that you're an expert in this field, and it's something that I've kind of thought about for, again, European countries, let's say Irish, when we're setting up our history. What are the kind of key fundamentals for packaging and labeling that, again, have all those stakeholders in mind and kind of can please across the board? What advice would you have in this area?
Sure, yeah. So I guess the first and obvious place to start is it's always going to depend on what the priority policies are of the jurisdiction, right? Again, when we first started in Colorado, it wasn't quite clear what those important priorities were because everybody's fear and everybody's hope was the main priority. And it was a matter of not knowing yet which of those things were going to play out as realistic or not realistic, etc. So I'd say first, one big thing that people have in mind is community safety, and of course, making sure that there is no access by children or minors to marijuana products, for example. So one thing that we see on the packaging side is pretty much universally across all states, and it does depend on the product type. But you'll typically see child resistance requirements around the actual containers that contain, especially things like edibles. Where children could be, if they see a chocolate wrapper, of course they're going to open that chocolate wrapper and eat it regardless, right? And so a lot of states will require that you have certain packaging requirements in terms of how those things are opened, also that they're opaque or not see-through, you know what I mean, so that kids can't kind of see what's inside those packages. That's one example of the kinds of requirements that they're putting around products. Something like flour may look different to something like a gummy in that sense. And to that end, you get into some of the quirkier rules. And one of the anecdotes Colorado lawyers love to bring up, and it's found itself into the rules of many other states, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up in international rules as well, is we have a rule that prohibits edibles in the shape of a human, animal, or fruit. Which has led to many interesting debates about what, a fictional fruit, so is a tomato a fruit? So there's lots of interesting, discussions that come out that you don't quite expect will. But again, it's from the same point of view of how do we, the idea is, and the fear is that a child will see a peach shaped gummy and want to eat that peach, or see a unicorn shaped chocolate and want to eat that chocolate. So again, it's always trying to tie these rules to what policy they're trying to effectuate. Another big one is just this idea at the very beginning that people would not know, they wouldn't be able to distinguish generally between THC products and regular consumer products. So in virtually every state, you're going to see a big THC symbol on those products, which immediately will tell the consumer, back off, this is cannabis, right? So there's things like that that you'll see. Otherwise, a lot of it is informed by the FDA and regular consumer product regulations. So a lot of if you're putting out an edible, most states are going to require you to put out something equivalent to a nutritional fact panel, or something that you'd otherwise have to put on a box of granola, or a box of energy bars, or whatever it is, right? You're going to have to try to fulfill those requirements as well. And most state regulations are going to borrow from those federal regulations, even though the FDA is not involved in the marijuana space. On the hemp space, I do want to specify there's a lot more FDA concern. We have hemp as a lawful commodity in the United States, and so that is now a federally legal consumer product that is being sold across the United States. Suddenly, FDA guidelines on products become much more important, and I'd argue that FDA guidelines are going to be probably the most important guidance for hemp product manufacturers. So there is a divergence there, and just to explain that a little more finely, it's because marijuana or cannabis that has less than 0.3% THC, again, is not lawful at the federal level, and so you have pockets of legalization or pockets of regulation, and those states that are governing those pockets, well, they're gonna come up with the rules that they're satisfied with, again, for their policy perspectives.
Okay, very interesting. That's a wealth of information there. Something I wanted to add to that is, and I think it's Matthew O'Brien, one of the good colleagues that he works at 4PM, is the editor over there. He kind of brought it to my attention, the terpenes that are being added to the label. This is going to be a big thing for 2021. What's your take on this side of the packaging and labeling?
Yeah, the reason that's become a thing is because, of course, as the industry has become more commercialized and people have gotten into the labs and into the creating the oils for these products and things like that, there have become increasing public questions and concerns over what those ingredients are. Like any other industry, I suspect the more attention something gets and the more consumers a product has, the more questions are asked about the quality of the ingredients that are placed in there, the source of those ingredients. And so terpenes, of course, can come from a variety of different sources. And so the same way that someone would want to know where, what type of sugars or what type of, for example, if you're eating like a chocolate edible that's got other botanicals in it, you want to know where those botanicals come from and what they are. It makes complete sense that consumers would want to know that the terpenes that are being included in their products, or any other sort of not organic source material that's being included in their product, they'd want to know where that comes from and that it's safe for them to use. And so you have seen discussion around that. I can tell you that in Colorado, there's been discussion and new rules around what needs to be labeled and disclosed, and indeed what is permissible in terms of including those sorts of ingredients. I guess the important caveat is policy has in many ways outrun science in the United States, or at least institutional scientific knowledge, in the sense that federal policy has prevented us from knowing so much about these things before. And so we are seeing we are being enlightened through the experimental market that we have here. And year after year, that is why our regulations are evolving and why issues like this are becoming important, because it is consumers that are raising these issues for the first time, or business people that are raising these issues for the first time. And we're left to figure that out here at the state level, at least until the federal government takes more ownership over issues like these. And indeed, I'd argue that it would be good for constituents and for everyday consumers for the federal government to take a greater lead in making products simply safe.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a great piece of information. The last topic I wanted to talk to you about was something I know Bob, who set up your law firm, is very passionate about. It's cultivating a cannabis industry ecosystem, how important that is to the industry on both sides of the water and globally.
Yeah, no, I can't say enough. I mean, it's so much my philosophy that especially now, especially at this very critical juncture at the growth of the global cannabis industry, that we all need to just be responsible stewards of this space. I think that especially in the United States, we're cognizant of the fact that this is an industry that got people imprisoned, convicted for several decades. People are still behind bars for selling the substance that other people are becoming billionaires off of. And there is a social stigma still surrounding this industry. Generally speaking, there are still people today that are being arrested for marijuana possession in the United States. It's an important reminder that as we build this industry and as we are entrepreneurs in this space, that we remember those roots and that we are responsible in how we build this forward with that history in mind. To me, that is the most important principle, and that is making its way into the conversation here in the United States, certainly to do with social equity and racial equity and things like that. I also think that as this becomes a global industry, we need to just be good neighbors to one another and good allies to one another as business people and as neighbors in the same village, so to speak, so that this doesn't blow up in all of our faces, and or so that one person doesn't get to benefit from all of this while the rest of the world or the rest of us don't get to participate. I think we need to learn the lessons of the past and keep this an equitable and certainly potential full industry.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a great topic to end the show on, is that this is a big enough industry for everybody that's out there to take part on it, and having that social responsibility and acting like you would as if this is the banking industry or the finance industry, and your reputation should be something that everybody holds paramount in this industry. It's not about making a quick buck at all. It's a marathon more than a sprint.
Absolutely, and it's not just a dollar sign at the end of it. This is a human industry more than many others. It comes from a truly grassroots, and I think that there's so much potential. There's not just one bowl of sweets on the table for one person to take. There are bags and bags and bags of sweets, and we can all share together. So that has to be the mantra moving forward. And we need to create this industry in our own image. In that sense, we have an opportunity to build a new global commercial empire collectively, right? Akin to oil or coal or sugar. These massive industries. We have that opportunity to build it in a responsible and quite beautiful way. So I do hope that that's the way it goes. I hope that different countries and different professional groups are able to work together to sort of align in that and ensure that, and that greed ultimately is not the driving principle, but rather a desire to see this truly become what it can become.
Couldn't agree with you more, mate. Couldn't agree with you more. For those who want to know more about Hoban Law Group, the website is there down below us. Go and search it out. Have you got a Twitter handle or an Instagram account, or where can people find you if they wanted to follow you?
Yeah, no problem. You can either find me on LinkedIn or our Facebook. We do have a Hoban Law Group Facebook as well. You can find me just Darren Kaplan on LinkedIn. And otherwise, if you have any questions for me personally, I love to chat. I love to connect with people around the world. My email address is darren.kaplan@hoban.law, exactly like it is in the display there, just with a couple extra symbols. And you can always reach out, even if you just want to say, hey, even if you want to chat about cannabis policy. I'm quite a passionate person about this stuff, and I'd like to chat.
Cheers. Absolutely, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. I definitely look forward to having you on the show again in the next few months. Hopefully we've got lots of progression and some new things that we can talk about. So I'll let you start your day over there in Colorado and have a great weekend, mate. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks so much, Owen, and thanks so much to your audience. I really appreciate being on.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back again next week.